Hey guys, how's it going? Hope you're doing well. My name is Crown, and today I'm going to read you some very interesting stories that I hope that you're gonna love. And now, without further ado, let's go!
I work construction and have been living in this neighborhood for about 15 years. There's this one house on our street that everyone knew about. It looked like a regular cottage from the outside, but inside it was absolutely magical. The woman who lived there had turned every single wall into these incredible hand-painted murals of Disney movies and fairy tales. Snow White picking apples, Cinderella's castle, the whole 9 yards. The artist had been there since the mid-80s. She used to be an art teacher and later ran one of those paint and wine businesses that did really well. When she retired, she just did commission work and painted furniture. She was honestly one of the nicest people you'd ever meet, even when I was being a complete jerk to her about my loud truck or driving too fast through the neighborhood. We had our arguments, worked it out, and became good friends after that. Here's the thing, she never had a proper lease. The original landlord was this old guy who loved what she'd done with the place. He told her the art was fine since it was inside, not outside where it might bother neighbors or violate any city codes. He kept promising he'd sell her the house eventually, but you know how these things go. Nothing was ever put in writing. Then the landlord died. His kids inherited everything, and that's when our problem started. One of his sons came by with his daughter to inspect the property. The moment they walked inside and saw all those beautiful murals, the daughter went absolutely crazy for the place. She was probably in her early 20s, just out of college, and she wanted that house for herself. The son came back a week later and knocked on the artist's door. I was outside working on my truck when this whole thing went down. He told her they needed to talk about her living situation. When she said everything was fine with rent, he dropped the bomb that they wanted to use the property for family now. She brought up how his father had promised she could buy the place, but he just brushed that off, saying he didn't know about any promises. Then he had the nerve to call her beautiful murals property damage and threatened legal action if she didn't restore everything to original condition within 30 days. Those murals were works of art that probably increased the value of that place by $30,000. The poor woman was devastated. She came over to my place that night crying, asking if I knew any lawyers. Without a lease and no written agreement about the art, she didn't have much legal ground to stand on. But she's a fighter, so she started looking for new places immediately. Lucky for her, she found this perfect property in another state with a full art studio on the first floor. She decided to move rather than fight it out in court for months. That's when my buddy, who's a professional painter, made her an offer she couldn't refuse. He told her he'd restore that house to move-in condition for free because he'd been wanting to test out these new powered paint sprayers anyway. He promised to make it look exactly like those basic flip houses that sell for top dollar. You know, the boring white and gray everything. She thought that sounded perfect and told him to let them have their bland house. She moved all her stuff into storage, and my friend let her stay in his guest house for free in exchange for painting one mural in his living room. Within a week, everything was out of that house. The second week is when the real fun began. My friend and his landscaping buddy went to work with industrial sanders, completely buffing away every single mural from front to back. 40 years of incredible artwork just turned into colorful smudges on the walls. Then came the primer. My friend had this amazing new sprayer that could cover a whole wall in 4 passes. He masked off everything that wasn't supposed to be painted and went to town with this thick primer that would cover anything underneath. When that dried, he started what we call the basic house special paint job. Pure white semi-gloss on every single wall. But here's where it gets beautiful. He didn't stop there. The wood paneling, all the trim, switch covers, outlet covers, even the kitchen counters and cabinets got sprayed with the most soul-crushing shade of gray you've ever seen. When I walked through that house after he finished, it looked absolutely dead inside, like someone had sucked the life right out of it. The contrast was incredible. It went from this magical wonderland to looking like a corporate office building. The landscaping friend handled the outside. The artist had agreed to let him keep all the bushes and plants from the cottage facade in exchange for removing it without breaking anything. Well, this guy basically ripped out every plant, tore down the decorative cottage front, and dumped a bunch of gravel and sand where the garden used to be. He stuck one big boulder in the middle and called it landscaping. This past weekend, I was helping another neighbor with some repairs when I noticed the house was still completely empty. No cars, no lights, nothing. I asked him if he'd seen anyone move into the art house yet. He told me the funniest thing, there were some moving trucks there earlier in the week, but they never unloaded anything. The trucks just sat there for a few hours and then left. He hadn't seen anyone since. I started laughing so hard I almost fell off the ladder. I asked if he was kidding and he said nope. It looked like they took one look inside and decided to keep driving. I can only imagine what happened when that entitled daughter and her father showed up with their moving trucks, expecting to walk into this magical fairy tale house, only to find the most depressing, soulless box you've ever seen. All those beautiful Disney murals she fell in love with were gone. The charming cottage exterior was ripped out and replaced with gravel and a rock. They got exactly what they asked for. They wanted the house restored to its original condition and free of property damage. Well, mission accomplished. My best friend and I had been close since middle school. We're both 18 now, and I thought we had this unbreakable bond. She's always been a bit of a risk taker, but lately she's been making some seriously questionable choices that have me worried sick about her safety. 3 days before this whole mess went down, she bought a motorcycle. Not just any motorcycle purchase though, she bought it completely behind her parents' backs. No motorcycle license, no permit, no insurance, no license plate, and definitely no registration. Basically, everything about riding this bike was illegal. But that wasn't even the worst part. On the very first day she owned the thing, she crashed it. Completely her fault too. The police showed up, arrested her on the spot, and she had to deal with all that legal drama. This wasn't her first run-in with vehicle violations either. This was her third time having to go to court for this kind of stuff. And somehow her parents still had no idea about any of it. So when we made plans to go to a car show the next morning, I knew there might be some complications. The car show was only 10 minutes from my house but 30 minutes from hers. So we agreed she'd sleep over at my place. The plan was simple. She'd go to some car and motorcycle meet that evening, then come over to my house by 9 at the latest. At 5 in the afternoon, I called to confirm everything was still good. She told me she'd definitely be at my place by 9 at the latest since she was heading to the meet first. I asked her to be careful, and she brushed off my concerns, saying not to worry about it. I wasn't thrilled about her going to one of those meets. They're pretty dangerous. And let's just say, not everything that happens at them is exactly legal. But she's an adult, so I figured she could make her own choices. By 7, I was getting a little anxious, so I sent a text asking for an update. Nothing. Radio silence. I knew she was probably just having fun and lost track of time, but given her recent track record with the motorcycle and legal troubles, I was genuinely worried about her safety. I kept texting every hour, just checking in. Still nothing. I could see she was active on social media though, posting stories and clearly having a good time. She was even half swiping my messages, which meant she was seeing them but choosing not to respond. By 10:30 p.m., my parents had reached their limit. My dad pointed out that it was getting really late and they were heading to bed soon. My mom reminded me that they'd already told me they didn't want an illegal motorcycle in our driveway. They explained that the homeowners association is strict about noise after 9 p.m., especially with all the senior citizens in the neighborhood. I apologized and said I'd try calling her again. My dad was firm though, telling me that if she wasn't there by now, she couldn't stay over. He said they couldn't have someone showing up in the middle of the night making noise and potentially bringing legal trouble to our doorstep. I completely understood where they were coming from. My parents aren't unreasonably strict, but they're firm about respecting our neighbors and staying out of legal drama. I sent her messages on 3 different platforms explaining the situation and apologizing for the change in plans. I told her I was really sorry, but my parents said she couldn't stay over anymore since it was so late. I explained they were worried about the motorcycle noise and the homeowners association rules and suggested we do a rain check on the car show. I waited and waited. She never fully opened any of my messages, but I could see she was still active online, still posting. At that point, I figured she'd either find somewhere else to crash or just head home. At 3:45 a.m., my parents came into my room looking absolutely bewildered. My mom told me that my friend was outside in our driveway revving her motorcycle. My dad said she'd been out there for 10 minutes, just revving the engine over and over. After everything I'd explained about the noise rules and respecting our neighbors, she showed up anyway and was deliberately making as much noise as possible. We all decided to stay quiet and pretend we were asleep, hoping she'd get the hint and leave. Instead, she started banging on our front door. Not just knocking, full-on banging like she was trying to wake up the entire neighborhood. The banging went on for what felt like forever. I was mortified thinking about our elderly neighbors trying to sleep and having to listen to this chaos. My parents were furious but trying to stay calm. Finally, around 4 a.m., she gave up and left. Then my phone lit up with messages. She called me, literally the biggest jerk she'd ever met, and said I was the worst friend ever. She said she couldn't believe I had done this to her and asked how I could treat her this way after everything we'd been through. I was stunned. Here I was, worried sick about her safety all night, and she was calling me names for having reasonable boundaries. I didn't even know how to respond to that level of entitlement, but it got worse. The next day, she started posting on social media about what an awful, terrible friend I was. She was putting our business out there for everyone to see, painting herself as this victim who got abandoned by her heartless best friend. I felt so disrespected and disgusted, not just for me but for my family, who had been nothing but welcoming to her over the years. The complete disregard for our neighbors, our property, and basic respect was mind-blowing. That's when I realized I had a choice to make. I could keep enabling her behavior and continue walking on eggshells around her poor choices, or I could prioritize my own sanity and safety. When her parents texted me asking why her location wasn't showing at my house anymore, I told them everything. The motorcycle purchase, the accidents, the court dates, the illegal riding, all of it. They deserved to know what their daughter was doing behind their backs. Turns out, they were grateful I told them. They'd been wondering why she had all these mysterious expenses and why she was acting so secretive lately. They immediately took action to get her the help and supervision she clearly needed. I made the difficult decision to cut her off completely. We've been through a lot together over the years, but I couldn't keep acting like her mother and cleaning up after her messes. I was tired of worrying about her safety while she made increasingly dangerous and illegal choices. I'm a police officer in a mid-sized city, been on the force for about 8 years now. I work patrol with my partner, and we've seen our fair share of crazy people, but nothing quite prepared me for what happened that Tuesday afternoon in September. My partner and I had just finished responding to a minor fender bender when we decided to grab some coffee from this little shop downtown. It was around 2 p.m., pretty quiet time usually. My partner went inside to get our usual orders while I stayed with the patrol car, doing some paperwork from our previous call. That's when she showed up. This woman, probably in her late 40s, walked over to my car like she owned the street. She was wearing this expensive-looking blazer and had that particular haircut that screams, "I want to speak to your manager." She was already angry before she even reached me. She demanded that I do something about a car parked in front of her house. Her voice was loud and angry from the start. I looked up from my paperwork and greeted her politely, asking what the problem was. She told me there was a beat-up Honda that had been parked right in front of her house for 3 days and she wanted it towed immediately. She emphasized that it was her house like that gave her special rights. I set down my clipboard and asked if the vehicle was parked legally on a public street. This kind of complaint wasn't unusual, though her tone was already setting off warning bells. She said she didn't care if it was legal because it was in front of her house. She claimed she paid taxes and had rights. Her voice was getting louder with each word. I explained that if the vehicle was parked on a public street and wasn't violating any parking regulations, there wasn't much I could do. I told her that people have the right to park on public streets. She got even angrier if that was possible. She said that was ridiculous and threatened to call my supervisor. She demanded my badge number. I remained calm, used to dealing with upset citizens. I gave her my badge number 4187 and told her if she wanted to file a complaint, she could contact our non-emergency line and they would direct her to the appropriate department. She refused and demanded that I handle it right now. Then she asked if I knew who she was, like she was some kind of celebrity. I told her I didn't know who she was. She claimed she was on the city council and had connections. She threatened that she could have my job. Her voice was getting more shrill and demanding. This was escalating quickly, but I dealt with people claiming to have connections before. Most of the time, it was just hot air. I explained that I understood her frustration, but threatening a police officer wasn't going to help her situation. I repeated what I could and cannot do about the parking issue. She told me not to lecture her and claimed she knew her rights. She started pacing back and forth beside my patrol car, getting more agitated by the second. I could see people on the street starting to notice the commotion. I told her I needed her to calm down. I explained that if she continued to be disruptive, I would have to ask her to move along. She yelled that I couldn't tell her what to do because this was America, and she had freedom of speech. Her voice was getting loud enough that more people were stopping to stare. I acknowledged that she did have freedom of speech, but explained that she didn't have the right to disturb the peace or interfere with police business. That's when she really lost it. She accused me of doing nothing and suggested I was probably writing fake tickets or doing something corrupt. She tried to lean over and look at my paperwork, getting way too close to my personal space. I immediately became more alert. I ordered her to step back from the vehicle and told her she needed to maintain her distance. She challenged me, asking what I would do if she didn't. Would I arrest her just for looking at what her tax dollars were paying for? Her tone was mocking and confrontational. I gave her a final warning to step back and lower her voice, or I would have to take action. She asked mockingly what action I would take. Would I tase her? She said it like it was the most ridiculous thing in the world. But then her eyes focused on my duty belt, and I saw something change in her expression. It was like a switch flipped. She said that cops think they're so tough with all their little toys. Her voice had turned from mocking to genuinely threatening. Before I could react, she lunged toward me and grabbed for my taser. I was caught completely off guard. She actually managed to get her hands on it and yanked it from my belt. I immediately ordered her to put it down, but she was already backing away, holding my taser like some kind of trophy. She taunted me, saying I wasn't so tough now. She said maybe I would listen to her when she had the power. Her whole demeanor had changed from entitled to dangerous. I immediately reached for my radio with one hand while trying to position myself defensively. I commanded her to drop the weapon immediately. She argued that it wasn't a weapon, just a taser. She claimed she wasn't going to really hurt me, but she was holding it wrong, clearly having no idea how to operate it. That didn't make the situation any less dangerous. I told her that it was indeed a weapon and that she was threatening a police officer. I ordered her to put it down and step away. She said she just wanted me to do my job and tow that car. People on the street had definitely noticed now. Some were pulling out their phones, others were backing away. I could see a few people ducking into nearby shops. I told her I could not and would not negotiate with her while she was holding my equipment. I demanded she put it down immediately. That's when she figured out how to activate it. She said fine, if I wouldn't listen to reason, she would make me listen. She pointed it directly at me and fired. The taser probes hit me in the chest, and I went down hard. The electrical current was excruciating, every muscle in my body seizing up. I couldn't move, couldn't speak, couldn't do anything, but experienced the worst pain I'd ever felt. But what Karen didn't know was that my partner had come out of the coffee shop just in time to see her tase me. My partner didn't hesitate. I heard him shout a warning, but Karen was still holding the taser, still standing over me like she'd won some kind of victory. The gunshot was incredibly loud. I was still recovering from the taser, my vision blurry and my body not responding properly but I heard Karen scream. My partner had shot her in the arm, just enough to stop the threat without killing her. She dropped my taser and fell to her knees, clutching her wounded arm and screaming about how we were trying to murder her. The next few minutes were chaos. My partner called for backup and an ambulance while trying to check on me and keep Karen contained. She kept screaming about lawsuits and police brutality, even though she was bleeding and clearly in shock. When backup arrived, they secured the scene and took Karen into custody. The paramedics checked us both out. I had some muscle soreness and burn marks from the taser probes, but nothing serious. Karen's arm wound was clean. The bullet had gone straight through without hitting any major arteries. When they loaded her into the ambulance, she was still yelling threats. She claimed this wasn't over and that she was calling the mayor and the governor. She insisted we would all lose our jobs. But here's the thing about threatening police officers and assaulting them with their own weapons: it doesn't matter who you know or think you know. Karen spent 3 days in the hospital under guard before being transferred to county jail. Turns out she wasn't actually on the city council at all. She was just some entitled woman who owned a small business and thought that gave her special privileges. She was charged with assault on a police officer, theft of police equipment, disorderly conduct, and making terroristic threats. Her fancy lawyer tried to argue that she was having a mental health crisis, but the whole thing was caught on multiple cell phone videos and my body camera. The trial was pretty straightforward. The jury saw the footage, heard the testimony, and took less than 2 hours to find her guilty on all counts. She got 3 years in state prison with no possibility of parole for 18 months. Her business folded while she was awaiting trial, and her husband divorced her 6 months later. The really satisfying part? That beat-up Honda she was so upset about. It belonged to her neighbor's college-age son who was home visiting for a few days. Completely legal, completely innocent, and the whole thing could have been resolved with a simple conversation. 2 weeks ago, my partner had a medical emergency that nearly killed him. We're both in our 20s, and he has a chronic condition that affects his mobility. Most people can't tell just by looking at him that he's disabled. He doesn't use a wheelchair or walking aids all the time, which unfortunately means we deal with judgment from strangers pretty regularly. The past 14 days have been the worst of my life. I've been living at the hospital, sleeping in uncomfortable chairs, eating vending machine food, and watching the person I love fight for his life. The doctors weren't sure if he was going to make it through the first week. I barely slept, barely ate, and definitely didn't shower enough. I was emotionally and physically drained. Yesterday was finally the day he could come home. His medical team told me they'd escort him down to the car with all his belongings, so I didn't need to worry about navigating the hospital with his stuff. They suggested I park in one of the disabled spaces near the main entrance to make the transfer easier. I drove to the hospital and found a disabled parking spot close to the ward entrance. I displayed his disabled parking badge clearly on the dashboard and settled in to wait. The relief I felt knowing he was finally coming home was incredible. After 2 weeks of hell, we were going to be okay. That's when I heard someone say "excuse me" from behind my car. I rolled down my window and saw a woman in her 50s who had pulled up right behind me in the parking lot. She was sitting in her driver's seat looking annoyed. She told me I needed to move my car because she had her disabled mother with her and needed the parking space. I explained that I was waiting for my disabled partner and that the medical team was bringing him down. I told her I needed this space too. She insisted I should go wait somewhere else and said she needed the space more than I did. She pointed out that her mother was disabled and I wasn't. But after 2 weeks of thinking I might lose the love of my life, I was done with entitled people. I actually laughed and told her no, I wasn't moving and she should find another spot. I put my head back in the car and turned up the radio. Big mistake. This woman absolutely lost it. She got out of her car, walked over to my window, and started banging on the glass. She yelled that I was incredibly rude and unsympathetic. She accused me of abusing the disabled badge and said I had no right to park there. She demanded I move my car right now. I had no intention of explaining my personal situation to this stranger, I'd been through enough without having to justify my partner's disability to some random woman in a parking lot. But I don't know what came over me. Maybe it was the stress, maybe it was just being fed up with people like her. I pulled out my phone and told her to smile. I took her picture. She looked like I'd slapped her and demanded to know what I'd just done. She told me to delete it right now. She fumbled around in her purse and pulled out some kind of card, waving it in my face. She announced that she worked for the press and said taking her picture was illegal. She threatened legal action if I didn't delete the photo immediately. At this point, I was committed to this course of action. I told her I was keeping the photo and took another one. She started screaming for security at the top of her lungs, waving her arms around like she was being attacked. People walking by stopped to stare. Other cars slowed down to see what was happening. She gave me this smug grin and told me I was in real trouble now. She said security would make me delete the photos and move my car. Two security guards jogged over. They looked at the scene, this large, angry woman screaming at my car window, while I sat calmly inside with my disabled parking badge clearly visible. She told the guards that I was harassing her and had taken pictures without permission. She claimed I was illegally parked in a disabled space and demanded they make me delete the photos and move my car immediately. She kept waving that press card around like it gave her special powers. The security guards looked at me, looked at the disabled badge, then looked back at her. One of them raised an eyebrow and told her she needed to leave because she was clearly the one doing the harassing. The other guard pointed out that I had a valid disabled parking permit displayed and wasn't doing anything wrong by parking there. The first guard added that I was allowed to take photos of someone who was bothering me. Her smug expression completely disappeared. She looked like a cartoon character who just realized they'd run off a cliff. She called us all a very nasty word that I won't repeat here, stomped back to her car and drove off with her tires squealing. Just then she disappeared around the corner. I saw my partner being wheeled out by his nurse. They'd witnessed the tail end of the drama through the glass doors. My partner asked what all that was about. I explained it was just some entitled woman who thought she deserved the parking spot more than us. The nurse said they get that a lot with younger people who have invisible disabilities. She mentioned that some people think disability has a certain look. One of the security guards commented that the audacity of some people never fails to amaze him. We all had a good laugh about it while loading my partner's belongings into the car. The nurse made sure he was comfortable for the ride home and the security guards wished us well. When we drove away, my partner shook his head and said he couldn't believe she tried to use a press card like it was a police badge. I told him security basically said she was the problem, not me. He said he was proud of me for not backing down. He pointed out that we deal with enough judgment about his condition without letting random strangers bully us in parking lots. The whole incident reminded me why I love him so much. Even after everything he'd been through, he was more worried about me having to deal with that woman's attitude than anything else. Oh, and I should mention, to get into that disabled parking area, I had to go through a security barrier where they checked the disabled badge and confirmed I was authorized to park there. So this woman knew perfectly well that I had legitimate access to that space. She just thought she was more deserving of it than we were. I work for a mid-sized tech company doing installations and maintenance at client sites. My job requires traveling, and I've gotten used to the routine of hotels and rental cars. I'm good at what I do, and my supervisor has always been happy with my work. A few months back, the company announced new cost-saving measures. They implemented new procedures, including requiring a funding letter from the financial department for any business travel, even if your supervisor had already approved it. I thought it was overkill, but whatever. My supervisor came to me with an urgent job at a client site about 2 hours from home. It was standard work that I'd done dozens of times before. I filled out all the paperwork, got his approval, and then went down to the financial department to get my funding letter. The woman in charge of travel expenses was someone I'd never dealt with before. Let's call her Karen because that's exactly the vibe she gave off. She was one of those people who seemed to enjoy making simple things complicated. She asked me what dates I would be traveling. I told her I'd be there for about a week maybe longer depending on how the work went. She said she needed exact dates for the funding letter. I explained that it was hard to say exactly because sometimes these jobs take longer than expected if we run into complications. She insisted she needed the specific date range and demanded I give her my best estimate. I gave her a 2-week window to be safe. She printed out the funding letter with those exact dates and handed it to me. Then she told me that this covered one trip only, and if I needed to make multiple trips, I'd need separate funding letters for each one. I said I understood. I drove up to the client site and checked into my usual hotel. The work went smoothly for the first few days, but then something unexpected happened. The client had to shut down their systems for some routine maintenance, which meant I couldn't continue my work. Instead of sitting around doing nothing for 3 days, I decided to head home and spend the weekend with my family. I'd come back the following week when they were ready for me to continue. It seemed like a win-win situation. The company wouldn't have to pay for my hotel room and meals while I wasn't working, and I'd get some quality time at home. I checked out of the hotel and drove back. When I returned the following week to finish the job, everything went perfectly. I completed the work, packed up, and headed home feeling good about how efficiently I'd handled everything. That's when the nightmare began. I submitted my travel expense report, expecting it to be processed without any issues. A few days later, I got an email from Karen saying my travel claim had been rejected because I had taken 2 separate trips but only had funding for one. I walked down to her office, confused. I asked her what she meant by 2 trips, since everything was within the dates on the funding letter. She explained that I had checked out of my hotel and gone home, which ended the first trip. When I came back, that started a second trip, and 2 trips required 2 funding letters. I pointed out that I was doing the same job the whole time and had just gone home for a few days because there was no work to do. She said it didn't matter because the system showed I had checked out and come back, making it 2 trips. I argued that it was ridiculous and that I had actually saved the company money by not staying in the hotel when I wasn't working. She told me I should have thought of that before I left and that she couldn't process my claim without proper funding letters. I tried explaining the situation to her supervisor, but they backed her up completely. They said the rules were clear and I should have gotten 2 funding letters if I planned to make 2 trips. The worst part was that I had to pay off my company credit card with my own money while this got sorted out. For over a month, I was basically giving the company an interest-free loan of several $1,000s while they figured out their bureaucratic mess. During those 6 weeks, I called Karen's office almost daily asking for updates on my travel reimbursement. Each time she would tell me they were still working on it and that these things take time when people don't follow procedures correctly. I would remind her that I had followed the procedures, but that the procedures just didn't make sense. She would always respond that she didn't make the rules, she just enforced them. Eventually, after escalating to multiple levels of management, they finally admitted their system was flawed and reimbursed me. But Karen made sure to let me know she wasn't happy about it. She warned me that in the future I needed to make sure I understood the funding letter requirements before I traveled. I told her I did understand them, but that the problem was they were designed by people who don't actually travel for work. She asked me what I meant by that, but I just thanked her for finally processing my claim and left. Fast forward a few months, and I had another job at the same client site. This time I knew exactly how their stupid system worked. I got my funding letter from Karen, who made a point of explaining the rules to me again, like I was a child. She reminded me that the letter covered one trip only, and if I left and came back, that would be 2 separate trips. I told her it was crystal clear. I drove up and started the work. Sure enough, the same thing happened. The client needed to shut down their systems for maintenance, leaving me with nothing to do for several days. But this time I had learned my lesson about dealing with Karen and her ridiculous rules. Instead of checking out of the hotel and going home like any reasonable person would do, I left my stuff in the room, drove home, and spent 3 days on my couch while the company paid for an empty hotel room and daily meal allowances I wasn't using. I'm sitting here right now watching TV at home while my hotel room sits empty 2 hours away. The company is paying about $200 a day for that room, plus another $75 in meal reimbursements that I'm not spending. Over these 3 days, they're wasting over $800 because Karen and her department are more concerned with following their nonsensical rules than actually saving the company money. The beautiful irony is that Karen will probably get praised for implementing these cost-saving measures, while the company hemorrhages money due to the very system she insists on enforcing. Tomorrow, I'll drive back up, finish my work, and submit a perfectly compliant expense report. Karen won't be able to find a single thing wrong with it because technically, I never left my trip. And now we have reached the end of today's stories. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.